Last week we talked about the first commandment, and we said that it was, you shall have no other gods before me, but it really means there's only one God. Today we talk about two other commandments that are really both corollaries to the first commandment. The one about idols and the one about swearing. When I was a boy growing up, and I think for a lot of us, what this meant was that when you cuss, you can't say God. That was kind of where that came from. I had a father that was very careful not to say God, but he was a mechanic. And I'll be honest with you, he didn't hear me cuss until I was 14 in that shop, and I started to work for him when I was 5. So it was the first time I'd ever said a bad word. And if you believe that, we have to go back to the prayer confession. So, oh my gosh. Let's start with commandment number 3 about the swearing. Because Jesus' way to say the original commandment was, carry out the vows that you make. Don't swear by God. Carry out the vows you make. And just leave it at yes or no. What does taking the name of the Lord your God in vain mean anyway? The truth is, it's a little difficult even to translate. Modern translations have said it several ways because there's a fuller meaning in it than stop cussing with God's name. One of the translations says, don't take God lightly. Another one says, no wrongful use of the name of the Lord. Remember last week we talked about how important it was to be careful with the name of God and names in general because you have power over people when you know their name. You can misuse that power in its familiarity, and that's letting you in. And so we have to be careful with that. That wrongful use thing is where the problem is about the commandment. So, how do we take God lightly? How do we wrongfully use the name of God? How do we wrongfully use God in our own lives and in our discipline and in our living? The word vain is an interesting word because we usually think of it as looking in the mirror and, you're vain and that kind of thing. But it can also mean something that's empty, something that's useless. It's an action that has no purpose or meaning. It's a vain action. And that's made me think all week long because the question that I've had this week is, where are the places that we think God is useless? Where we would think that talking about God in that place would be in vain. Where would it be empty? Where would we not have a reason to talk about God? And so I'm wondering about that. Where are the places in our common life, in our daily life, where we don't talk about God or even think about God when we're there? Yeah. I'm glad somebody doesn't think that's rhetorical. Social media, right? Yeah, you don't, what else?
Daily chores.
Daily chores, common stuff, things you're not thinking about much anyway that you do automatically. There are lots of things we do automatically, isn't it? We do without thinking, right, at all. Good habits, bad habits. We might think about God some with those. What else? At work, someone said, some at work, right. Uh, business is business, right? There are rules, there are ethics in business, right? Companies have business ethics. Some of you know my daughter works for HEB, and they have great business ethics. They started with a husband and wife who wanted to start a Christian business. It was really an amazing thing. They've become, the second largest grocery corporation in America, isn't that right? And they still have that. When my daughter started HEB, she had to go through the HEB culture class. Did you know they have one? Everybody goes through the culture class. One of the people that was being hired to run the cash registers was in the culture class. And the guy who sat down next to her was the new vice president at HEB. Everybody goes through the culture class. Okay. I had a good elder in one of the churches I served who worked in real estate. And he came to me and he said, David, I need a job. I've got to find a job. And I said, well, why? He said, I have a boss who told me I had to do something that really breaks the law. And if I didn't do it, I'd be fired. Business is business, right? There are all kinds of values and all kinds of systems and all kinds of things. And sometimes we don't let God into the boardroom. God's never a topic of conversation. Those values are not things that are put out in front to say, this is important, right? So one of the problems in America, at least in my opinion and otherwise, is we used to want businesses to make a profit. They needed to make a profit to stay in business, right? When did it start happening when maximizing all the profit you can get became a norm in lots of businesses? When is it that you can neglect employees and abuse employees to the point that some of our friends who live over near Divine Redeemer are working 2 jobs and their spouse is working a job and they still can't pay the rent and buy groceries? Right? If we leave God out of the boardroom, then God is useless in that boardroom. Where's another place? Someplace else? Driving. Right, driving. I don't know about you, but I came back from Presbytery on 35, and God was in my car, and I was talking to him a lot. So, oh my gosh.
A lot of the time listening to music or watching
TV, right.
most of the time.
That's right. What about a voting booth? What about a voting booth? Does the separation of church and state mean that politics and religion should never meet? That religion is for family life and love and personal relationships and things like that. But the religion should never have anything to do with politics. Right? No. 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 You have friends. You have friends. They go to church, they don't go to church, whatever. That kind of thing. Have you ever asked them if they take God into a voting booth? Have you ever asked them if they're loyal to a party and they've ever asked if that party is doing what they think God should want the country to be, direction should be going? Is that ever part of the conversation? Do we let God into the conversation about politics? It's a way that we voice a Christian witness. We talk about social justice. We talk about social witness. That's a way that we try to influence the society. Politics, a lot of times, boils down to an either-or choice, right? And I play golf with a bunch of people sometimes, and I'm a stranger out there in a way, and I walk, so, I'm really an oppressed minority. And I get with strangers and they find out I'm a minister. And they apologize to me for the way they've talked about a particular person who happens to be running the country right now. And I tell them, my problem is not about politics. My problem is about the Ten Commandments. And nobody's perfect. And you can't say, oh, they are all alike up there in Washington. Because I know they're not. I know some of them, and they're not. And there's better than worse. And we have to admit that and be honest about that. And we have to realize that if we are in a place where we have a choice for better, we have to speak up and say who we're voting for and why as a Christian. It's an act of Christian responsibility as well as good citizenship. God belongs in every voting booth. But God's not there unless we walk in with God. Does that make sense? Okay. So let's get personal about one other thing. What about financial decisions? When you're making a decision about what you ought to buy and that kind of thing, do you ever really stop and think, would God want me to buy this or that? Or is this how much money I'm spending on this? Would God spend this money? I did a stewardship sermon one time at that big church downtown that I worked at one time. It was a contemporary service, and I preached a sermon on Stewardship Sunday, and the title of it was, Would Jesus Drive a Lamborghini? Okay? And it got real quiet, And I thought, oh my God, somebody owns a Lamborghini. I'm in deep trouble. No, but I preached the sermon. And the idea was, when we're talking about our stewardship and our life and our commitment, a lot of times what we worry about is we want to put on a hair shirt and always feel guilty because of what we do, because we spend too much money or we have too nice a life or that kind of thing. So what would happen if we started at the other end and we said, there's some things I just can't do because I can't imagine Jesus doing that. Okay? And if you can't imagine Jesus doing it and you're a follower, where does that put you? You either have to kick Jesus out of the room or you have to take that seriously, right? About 8 months later, I was in my office doing some work, and this couple came in and said, hi, David, we're so-and-so. And she said, you don't know us, but we're a member here at the church and that kind of thing. And we were in the worship service for the Lamborghini sermon. And I said, oh, I hope you don't own one. So, and they laughed. They said, no, but we wanted to let you know something that we've done recently. She said, my wife drives a decent car. She drives it for about 70,000 miles or so, and we traded in. And we were going to shop for another car, and we were looking at cars, and the ones she liked all kind of cost somewhere between $70,000 and $75,000. Larger BMW, whatever. And we went home and we said, it's a Lamborghini. We can't buy that car. She said, so we talked and we kind of strategized and we looked at finances and we looked at loans and the rest of that. And we found out that we could buy a $35,000 or $40,000 car with little or no interest, and we would have enough money to buy a Habitat house. And so that's what we did. And we want to thank you because we're paying off a loan on a Habitat house. They let Jesus in the room. So it's not about swearing. No. But it's the fact that if there's only one God, then that God is everywhere and everywhere in your life. And so your yes is yes and your no is no. But your yes and no are always something that God hears. All right? Idols. Objects, just stuff. Right? that has power because we put power into it as symbols. What do we call this? The almighty dollar? It's just a symbol, isn't it? The reason it's just a symbol is you can't buy anything with it anymore. You know, right? Because this has become so powerful and so big and so consuming that you have to have lots of this to do anything. Right? You know? About a month ago, I was surfing the net in the morning with the news, and I found out they have a big, huge problem in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Do you know what it is? They have too many trillionaires who have moved to Jackson and bought up all the land. And they're hauling people 75 and 100 miles in buses to work in Jackson Hole. It's a problem, isn't it? It's a huge problem. Because we forgot about profit. Now we maximize profit. And you can't have enough money. Because money is where your value and status is. Because money's your God. Okay? Now, I don't think we have anybody in this room, and I'm safe talking about it. None of you drive a $500,000 Lamborghini, right? And none of you worship this, right? Hopefully. But how many of you would take the dare to get out your credit card statements, plural, for the month, and look down them and say, can I imagine Jesus buying this? Would Jesus never get this? Is this something Jesus would never do? Is this in my wildest dreams? And then you'll know whether this is God or not. Your yes is yes, and your no is no. So, what other idols can you think of? Are there other idols in our lives that you can think of? What? Who's? Oh my gosh. I'm sorry, I have to take this. It might be Holy Spirit. No, it's just Christian Carpenter, and it was a setup. Idol. Run your life. Consume your days. Can't leave home without it. Right? How many of you work a place where now you work on this most of the time? Me. There you go. How many of you used to work kind of 5 days a week and now you work 7 days? You're available 7 days a week? I'm one of them, right? It runs our lives. And here's the trouble. I was in New York, a couple of months, 3 months ago with my wife because she loves Sudden Foster. And I do too. So, and I was taking photographs. Y'all know that's my hobby. I had a hard time taking a photograph without somebody staring at one of these things. Right? They run us. How many of you know how to turn it off? Right? How many of you ever turn it off? See? We have to be careful about these things, don't we? Because this is not an idol. And it's not a toy. It's just a tool. It's just a tool. And you use it and you put it down. And if you're not free of this thing, then you're serving an idol. Right? So get free of it. Get free of it. And I promise you, if there's a reason that I don't call you back immediately or I don't answer your email immediately or that kind of thing, it's because sometimes I don't have this thing with me on purpose. And I'll get to you eventually. All right? And if it's something pastoral, I'll try to get to you quick. And if it's something about the church, then I'll get to you when I can. Okay? Let me turn this thing off because it might go off again. And if it did, I really might think it is Holy Spirit. So, okay. Power off. It's Father's Day. I think I'll keep it off the rest of the day. Is that all right? Here's the thing. We can talk and we have to talk about all the stuff out there that's crazy and stupid and bad. We have to be honest about that. And we can't live in denial. And we can't shut off the phone and the internet and the rest of it. And live in denial and ignore the responsibility we have in the culture. But we're supposed to live the pattern of Jesus' life. We said we'd be followers, and we're supposed to. And if you read the New Testament, he didn't spend a lot of time griping and yelling about what was bad in the culture. You realize that? There are only two classes of people that Jesus condemned to hell. Did you know that? It wasn't lepers, sick people. It wasn't whores. It wasn't tax collectors. It wasn't Roman centurions. It were the religious people of his day who had led the people astray by their own desire for power and gain and control. Right? And who were the other ones? The Dives of the world, the rich of the world, who had more money than they knew what to do with and walked past Lazarus. That's all we have. It's a record. The rest of the time, he's just helping who he could, the way he could, and trying to do some good in the world as God wanted him to do. That's our job. That's our job. Oh, yes, and one other thing. We're supposed to tell people why we do it, so that they're encouraged to follow too. Amen.